Welcome, dreamers, to another journey through time's hidden corridors. I am your guide through the dreaming historian, where ancient mysteries whisper their secrets to those who dare to listen. Tonight, we venture into the heart of the Egyptian sands, to a tomb sealed in silence for over 3,000 years. This is the story of Tutankhamun, the boy king whose burial chamber revealed not just glittering gold and ancient artifacts, but whispers messages long buried etched into walls, linen, and stone. A chamber not only of death, but of riddles waiting to be unraveled. Before we embark on this mystical journey, if these whispers from the past resonate with your soul, let your presence be known through a gentle like and join our circle of dreamers by subscribing for more nightly journeys into history's hidden realms. Share with us, fellow dreamers, from which corner of the world you are joining tonight's contemplation. Let our global community of mystery seekers connect across time zones as we drift together into the past. Now settle into comfort, close your eyes, and let the ancient voices guide you into peaceful contemplation. Beneath the scorching Egyptian sun, time itself seemed to ripple and bend across the undulating sands. The Valley of the Kings, once a sacred necropolis for pharaohs and nobles, had, by the early 20th century, become a place of faded grandeur. Tourists and looters alike had passed through its limestone ravines, hoping for a glimpse of something ancient, something forgotten. Yet amidst the buzz of modern curiosity, one tomb remained hidden, untouched, as though the very sands conspired to protect it. It was here, deep within the Theban cliffs, that the wind whispered secrets only the patient could hear. For centuries, the desert had kept its counsel, guarding the resting place of a young pharaoh whose brief reign would come to define eternal mystery. Tutankhamun, the boy who ruled an empire, and whose tomb would stir the world. The air in the valley was dry and still, as if even nature dared not disturb what slumbered below. Blinding sun cast long, blade-like shadows between the ridges of ancient stone, and the rocks seemed to hold their breath, waiting for whom, no one knew. Then came a man with a quiet obsession. Howard Carter, a British archaeologist hardened by years of excavation and disappointment, was not a man of spectacle. He did not boast or beguile, he simply searched. With each passing season, his team chipped away at the earth with faith as their compass. And though others mocked him, dismissed his dreams of an undiscovered tomb, Carter listened not to men, but to something older, something deeper. Carter had long believed that somewhere among the tombs of ancient Thebes lay one more door, still sealed. His patron, Lord Carnarvon, had nearly withdrawn his funding. The sands had yielded so little, but Carter, driven by a vision, perhaps a whisper in the night, pleaded for just one more season. It was in November 1922, on a morning of pale gold light and crisp silence, that one of Carter's workmen stumbled upon a sunken stair. It led nowhere, or so it seemed. Just another ancient passage, long plundered or never finished. Yet Carter's hands trembled when he brushed away the first grains of dust. There was something different here. The stones did not lie. The steps continued down, not sideways like others, a hidden descent, a sacred threshold. They cleared away the debris, working slowly, reverently, as if they already knew that something extraordinary waited below. Eventually, the steps led to a sealed doorway. Over it, faint yet unmistakable, was the stamp of a name that had not graced the world in millennia. No pharaoh's tomb had ever been found so perfectly hidden, so untouched by thieves or time. And now, the desert that had waited in silence for 3,000 years was about to speak. Carter dared not open it at once. He waited for Lord Carnarvon to arrive, and days passed in a suspended dream. At last, on November 26, before a small group of men cloaked in dust and ore, the final stones were removed. As Carter peered inside, holding a candle, Lord Carnarvon whispered, "Can you see anything?" Carter replied in a voice that quivered like ancient linen, "Yes, wonderful things." But what he did not say not then was that he saw more than gold, more than statues and strange animals. He saw order and intention. He saw a story, carefully folded into every artifact, every symbol. A burial chamber, yes, but also a message. A ritual encoded in objects. A warning written in shadow. This was no ordinary tomb, and Tutankhamun was no ordinary king. As modern lights flickered over the chamber for the first time, shadows leaped like dancing spirits across gilded surfaces. The walls seemed alive with meanings not yet deciphered. The scent of ancient resin and sacred oils still lingered, mingling with the desert air like ghostly perfume. In the days to follow, the team would document and photograph the contents with painstaking care. Over 5,000 items, each one a fragment of a hidden cosmology. Furniture shaped like mythical beasts, dagger blades of meteoric iron, papyrus fragments written in devotional script, linen wrappings etched with names no one remembered, and behind it all, a whisper, not audible in the modern sense, but felt, a whisper of ritual, of fear, of reverence, as if the ancients had placed these objects not just to honor a boy king, but to communicate something to us. Many would later claim curses followed the excavation, that deaths and strange misfortunes haunted the tomb. But tonight, we will not chase phantoms of fear. Instead, we will seek what lies beneath the gold, beneath the myths. We will trace the hidden messages, the spiritual map encoded in Tutankhamun's tomb. Why was it built in such secrecy? Why was his name nearly erased from history? And what sacred truths did his burial preserve, waiting for dreamers like us to find them? The desert had waited in silence. Now, it begins to speak. And so, dreamers, let us descend into the tomb. Let us trace the incense trails of those who came before us. Let us follow the golden thread of mystery, ever deeper, into the next chapter. He was no more than 9 years old when the twin serpents of power and divinity were laid upon his brow. A child, slight of frame and untested by war, suddenly became the living god of the most ancient kingdom on earth. His name was Tutankhamun, the living image of Aten, a name born from heresy. Crowned under a sun that no longer answered the prayers of his people, the temples were silent, the gods had been cast aside, and the boy, cloaked in royal linen far too large for his limbs, inherited not only a throne, but a nation in spiritual turmoil. Tutankhamun was born during a time of upheaval when his predecessor, the enigmatic Akhenaten, had turned Egypt's divine order upon its head. The many gods of the Nile, Osiris, Amun, Thoth, Hathor, had been silenced, their temples shuttered, their priests dismissed. In their place, Akhenaten had installed a single, distant deity, Aten, the sun disk. Gone were the intimate rituals of the old faith. In their place, a sterile worship of light, unfiltered and absolute. The boy was born into this emptiness, but the whispers of the old ways had not died. They lingered in shadows, in songs passed down by nurses, in the soft prayers of old women sweeping temple courtyards long abandoned, and perhaps, in quiet moments, the boy heard them. He was married young perhaps to his half-sister Ankhesenaten. She was older, wiser, and her name bore the scar of the heresy. Together they were symbols of continuity. But the land needed more than symbols. It needed restoration. It is here that the story bends and folds upon itself, as if the truth, like a papyrus scroll, had been burned and rewritten. Some say it was the boy himself who sought to undo his father's radical reforms. Others say it was his advisors, men of the old priesthood, who moved his hand like a reed upon sacred script. What we do know is this: the boy's name was changed, from Tutankhaten to Tutankhamun, the living image of Amun. The old gods returned, their temples reopened. Statues that had been smashed were restored, offerings resumed. The balance, so long disturbed, was cautiously repaired. But can a child truly command the will of a nation? In the stillness of night, in the candlelit sanctums of his court, what did Tutankhamun feel? Was he merely a vessel for older men's ambitions, or did he alone in his youth reach for something transcendent? Perhaps it was during those long processions through Karnak sacred halls that the boy began to understand the weight of his crown, the scent of myrrh and lotus flowers, the chants of priests echoing through pylons carved with stories older than memory. It is here that he might have felt it, not power, but presence, the divine gaze, the ancient rhythm. In art he is shown as a mature king, though he never lived to see 20, always upright, always majestic. Yet his skeleton tells another story: fragile bones, a twisted foot, signs of congenital illness, a body perhaps burdened by the gods it carried. And in his tomb, his canopic chest suggests something else, a voice silenced early, a death unexpected. Still, within the brief candle flame of his reign, Tutankhamun accomplished more than some pharaohs did in decades. He brought back the deities, he restored balance to the divine order, and for this he was rewarded not with glory, but with obscurity. His successors erased his name from monuments, sealed his tomb in haste, and buried his story beneath the sand. And yet was that erasure not itself a kind of preservation? Because by hiding him from history, they spared his tomb from plunder. While the grand tombs of Seti and Ramses were robbed bare, the boy king's chamber remained untouched, like a secret whispered into the ear of time, and time, respecting the sanctity of that whisper, chose not to speak. Inside his tomb, amid the golden shrines and linen-wrapped deities, archaeologists found something stranger than wealth, a deep ritual silence. Many of the items placed within were not meant for display, but for unseen journeys. A child's throne, a worn tunic, a dagger made of a fallen star. These were not symbols of empire, They were intimate relics. They belonged to someone who believed not just in the gods, but that he might one day speak with them. Hieroglyphs carved near his burial chamber include not boasts of conquest, but invocations of protection. Ancient spells from the Book of the Dead, etched in black ink, adorned with jackals and ibis and serpents, all working together to guide the boy's soul through the underworld of shadows and rivers and gates. To dreamers like us, it is tempting to ask, did he reach the field of reeds? Did the boy who once ruled the two lands find peace among the stars? Or is he still whispering from beyond, in the golden glow of his funerary mask, in the strange positioning of his burial, in the rushed craftsmanship of his shrines? His name, once erased, now lives again, and each night that we speak it, we participate in a kind of resurrection. Tutankhamun, the boy who spoke to the gods. Let us now step further into his tomb, not as tourists of the past, but as silent guests. For in the next chamber lies something even more curious. A weapon, but not one forged by man alone. It was wrapped carefully, almost tenderly, in folds of ancient linen. Buried deep within the funerary treasures, far from the grand sarcophagi and golden statues, it lay nestled like a secret. It was not the most ornate object in the tomb, nor the largest, but it shimmered with a luster unlike any other, cooler than gold, darker than silver. A blade, slender, simple, and utterly otherworldly. Archaeologists paused when they saw it. Unlike the ceremonial daggers of other kings, this one appeared purposeful, functional, lethal. It had not rusted, it had not bent, and its surface, wavy like water held in metal, reflected light in a way no bronze or copper could. They tested it, not just for age or artistry, but for origin. What they discovered astonished even the most hardened experts. This was no ordinary iron, it came from the stars. The dagger, it turned out, had been forged from meteoric iron metal, derived from celestial stone that had fallen to earth long before the boy king drew breath. Within its alloy was nickel, far above the levels found in terrestrial sources, along with traces of cobalt, signatures of a journey through cosmic fire. To the ancient Egyptians, iron was known, but rare. So rare, in fact, that it was called iron of the sky, a metal of the gods. It was not mined, but found. Pieces of heaven scattered across the sands, stones that fell during the night, glowing as they descended, divine offerings hurled down from the celestial dome. Forging such metal was no small feat. Meteoric iron is brittle and difficult to shape. Yet this blade had been crafted with precision. Its handle was wrapped in gold. A crystal pommel glowed softly at the end, as if catching starlight still. The sheath, too, was delicately decorated, not with warlike symbols, but with protective spell sigils meant to guide, to defend, to preserve the soul. One might wonder why place such a powerful object in the hands of the dead. To answer this, we must step beyond modern logic into the dreamscape of ancient belief. For the Egyptians, the journey after death was fraught with peril. The soul faced trials, monsters, riddles. The deceased would battle chaos itself, Apep, the great serpent of darkness, and other nameless dangers in the Duhat. And so, the dagger was no weapon of conquest. It was a key, a divine tool, forged from the sky, meant to cut through the veils of the underworld, to separate illusion from truth, to defend the king's spirit as it traveled through dimensions unknown. Perhaps it was meant as a gesture of return, a fragment of the heavens offered back to the sky in reverence. Or perhaps it was intended to remind the gods that this boy, fragile in life, was now armed with celestial authority in death. Some scholars have speculated further. They note that the dagger was placed close to the king's body, not in the outer shrines, but in the innermost wrapping, almost as if it were meant to be kept close, within the spiritual reach of the soul itself. Was there a belief that Tutankhamun, reborn in the afterlife, might wield it again, not symbolically, but truly? Might he have been imagined as a warrior of light, traversing the sky with a blade forged in cosmic fire? Other blades like it have not been found. A few scattered references suggest that the elite may have possessed similar items, but none preserved with such care, none embedded in such deep ritual. It raises another question: how did they even know where to find these fragments of sky? Did the ancients track falling stars? Did they map the heavens not only for the gods, but to collect their remnants? In the tomb, near the blade, a series of decorative panels depict Tutankhamun's Kohi's spiritual double standing before Ra, the sun god. In his hand, the dagger glows, and beneath his feet, a serpent recoils, sliced through. It is a quiet image, no more than a few inches in size, but its message echoes with myth. The boy who died young was not gone. He had merely stepped through a veil, and in that other realm he carried with him the fire of the stars. To modern minds, the idea may seem poetic at best, but to the ancient soul, it was truth. And perhaps the deeper mystery lies not in the blade itself, but in the understanding it represents. For how did they know the stars could be touched? How did they recognize the power that fell from the heavens? And how did they long before telescopes, satellites, or spectrometers shape a fallen star into a guardian of the dead? This blade, forged in the darkness of space, now rests in a museum, its edge dulled by time, but its mystery sharpened by wonder. And each night, as dreamers pass into sleep, perhaps the soul of the boy king walks still dagger in hand, starlight in his eyes cutting through the shadows of time, guiding us toward ancient truths long buried. Now, let us continue through the tomb, deeper into the chambers where cloth, rather than stone, holds the oldest messages of all. It is often the grandest relics that seize our awe: golden masks, jewel-encrusted coffins, alabaster statues bathed in divine light. But within the sacred darkness of Tutankhamun's tomb, it was not the gold that carried the deepest messages. It was the linen, folded, wrapped, layered with intention. These ancient fibers were far more than burial wrappings. They were scripture. They were memory. They were whispers etched in thread, stretched across centuries like the strands of a spider's web catching the dew of eternity. To the ancient Egyptians, linen was not merely cloth. It was life's veil and death's cocoon. Each thread spun from flax by patient hands, many, likely those of priestesses, represented purity, protection, and sacred continuity. Linen touched the skin of kings and gods alike. It covered altars, lined temple halls, and swaddled the dead for their journey to the afterlife. When Howard Carter and his team began to slowly unlayer Tutankhamun's burial wrappings, they encountered a mystery both fragile and profound. Interwoven into the linen, barely visible at first, were small inscriptions, handwritten in dark ink, likely carbon-based, placed by a scribe or priest, whose identity is now lost to time. These markings were not decorative, they were intentional. Names, dates, fragments of invocations, tiny annotations made with care, as though the linen itself was a living scroll meant only for the god's eyes. In one strip of cloth, the name Tutankhamun was written alongside a short phrase, "Justified one before Osiris." In another, a sequence of hieratic script appeared to refer to the date of embalming, perhaps even naming the high priest who conducted the rite. These were not mere burial rites, they were affirmations of divine acceptance, a kind of spiritual passport woven directly into the fabric that cradled the king's flesh. Some of the cloth bore protective spells, abbreviated verses from the Book of the Dead, invoking the favor of Anubis, the jackal-headed guardian of the necropolis. Others contained symbols so faded they could only be revealed under infrared scanning. Their presence, however, was undeniable. Even more curious were the fingerprints, left behind by embalmers over 3,000 years ago. Several linen strips bore smudges of resin and palm oil, and in some cases, the clear ridges of thumbs and fingertips. They were not removed or wiped away. Perhaps they were not meant to be. Perhaps, to the ancient Egyptians, the touch of a ritual hand was as sacred as a written blessing. These hands were not embalming a corpse. They were constructing a resurrection. Layer upon layer, each sheet of linen enfolded the body like a chrysalis around a caterpillar. In the Egyptian mind, death was not an end, it was transformation. The linen was not concealment, it was becoming. Each fold carried symbolism. The number of layers, the order in which limbs were wrapped, the knots tied at the ankles and wrists. Even the direction of wrapping, left to right, or right to left, held ritual meaning. It was choreography for the dead, composed not with music, but with silence. Among the most delicate finds were garlands of dried lotus petals, pressed between layers of linen at the chest and crown. Though fragile and nearly dust, these flowers once floated upon the Nile, offered in temples, and worn by the living as symbols of rebirth. To find them in the wrappings of a pharaoh was to discover not just reverence, but poetry. In one remarkable moment, Carter's team uncovered a folded square of cloth bearing a partial ink drawing, simple, elegant, of a winged scarab. This symbol, associated with the rising sun and the self-created god Khepri, suggested that even the wrappings themselves were talismans. The linen did not merely shield, it spoke, but to whom? Was it meant for the gods, who would recognize these signs as signs of proper passage? Or perhaps for the Kota soul double of the pharaoh who would awaken into the next world needing reminders of who he had been, and what powers still protected him? Some Egyptologists suggest these inscribed wrappings were not common, even among royal burials. Tutankhamun's linen might have been prepared in haste, yet with a kind of mystical improvisation, a sacred urgency. As though the priests knew this burial was special, even if history would forget it for a time. There is also the question of reuse. Some of the cloth strips bore faded inscriptions that did not reference Tutankhamun at all, names of earlier rulers, dates that predated his death. Was this merely practicality, or was it an act of cosmic recycling, returning sacred texts and garments to the cycle of kingship? The idea is haunting that Tutankhamun may have been wrapped, in part, with linen once used by his ancestors, that his body, upon death, was folded into a tapestry of Timar, literal weaving of dynasties past, present, and imagined. And perhaps this is the message hidden in the cloth. Not a secret to be decoded with logic, but a presence to be felt. A whisper that says, I lived, I was loved, I was more than gold and power. I was part of a song that stretched across centuries. Today, the linen has crumbled, some preserved in climate-controlled glass, others too fragile to touch, let alone display. But they endure not as relics of the dead, but as soft echoes of memory. For those who dare to listen not just with the ears, but with the soul, the linen still whispers, his name, his path, his truth. Let us now leave the softness of cloth and step into the chamber beyond, where the gods themselves waited not in statues, but in silence and alignment. Within the dim, hallowed stillness of the burial chamber, the air seemed to hum with presence, not noise, not movement, but something deeper, an ancient awareness, as if the gods themselves stood just beyond the edge of human sight, cloaked in the folds of eternity, observing. Tutankhamun's tomb, though smaller and more hastily prepared than others of its kind, bore within it the unmistakable fingerprints of the divine. They were not loud, they were not brazen, they were watching. As Carter's team stepped into the heart of the sepulchre, they were greeted not by walls of gold, but by walls of shadow richly painted, yes, but subdued. Scenes of funerary ritual unfolded along the plaster, each brushstroke revealing a fragment of the journey through the Duat, the Egyptian underworld. Figures loomed tall, stiff, eyes unblinking. They were not decorations, they were witnesses. On one wall, Anubis, the jackal-headed god of embalming, stood poised and serene, his black form outlined in ochre and gold. In his hand, the flail of judgment. Beneath him, a procession of mourners and priests offered gestures of reverence, arms raised, incense flowing. To the left, Osiris, the green-skinned lord of the afterlife, sat enthroned within a shrine of painted reeds. His hands held the crook and flail symbols of rulership and fertility, and upon his brow, the white crown of Upper Egypt. He did not speak, he did not move, but his painted gaze seemed to pierce the walls of time. Behind him stood Isis and Nephthys, wings spread in protection, their faces drawn with sorrow and strength. The sisters of myth, the guardians of rebirth. They too had waited for the boy king. But perhaps the most curious figure of all was Tutankhamun himself, painted in radiant gold, standing before the gods as an equal. In one scene, he is depicted wearing the blue and gold Nemes headdress, touching hands with Osiris, almost merging with the divine. This was not flattery. This was theology. In death, the pharaoh did not worship the gods, he became one. Yet these painted gods were not the only divine watchers in the tomb. In the antechamber, Carter had found a set of 12 wooden statues, some no taller than a man's knee, others life-sized. Their features were serene, stylized, painted in black resin. Some bore the form of shabtis, magical servants meant to accompany the king in the afterlife. Others were depictions of divine guardians, arms crossed, staffs in hand, faces still and unreadable. Their placement was intentional, facing the walls, facing the coffin, forming a silent barrier between the living and the dead, a circle of protection. The largest among them, 2 sentinels stood flanking the entrance to the burial chamber itself, nearly life-size. These statues wore golden kilts, sandals, and Nemes headdresses. Their eyes, inlaid with obsidian and quartz, shimmered in the flickering torchlight. Their arms held staves, their backs straight, as though they had never known rest. They were not labeled, no inscriptions explained them, but their function was clear. They were the watchers. Some modern Egyptologists have suggested these statues were representations of the Ka, the spiritual double of the king. Others believe they were gods in disguise, perhaps Horus, the falcon god, guardian of pharaohs, whose essence flowed through every ruler's blood. Yet to those who stood before them, in that narrow chamber untouched by time, there was no need to theorize. The watchers watched. And so the question arises, why such silence? Why such subtlety? In grander tombs, the walls explode with color and chaos, gods fighting serpents, weighing hearts, offering blessings. But here, in the tomb of the boy king, the gods are still, present, but reserved. They do not instruct, they await. Some believe this stillness is the result of haste, The boy's sudden death left little time for grandeur. Others sensed something more deliberate, a theological pivot, a return not just to the gods, but to the mystery that preceded them. The placement of the tomb, too, suggests sacred geography. Though small, its orientation aligns subtly with key celestial markers. The rising of certain stars, the movement of the Milky Way. To the Egyptians, the sky was a temple, and to be buried in accordance with its rhythms was to ensure immortality. And then there is the question of the four nested shrines. Within the burial chamber, Tutankhamen's sarcophagus was encased by 4 golden shrines, each larger than the last. They formed a kind of divine chrysalis, enclosing him not just in gold, but in sacred geometry. Each shrine bore scenes of deities as Asneath, Selket, and Nephthys performing protective rites. Hieroglyphs curled across their surfaces like the tendrils of a living vine, invoking spells and affirmations. Some were so tightly fitted, Carter's team had to disassemble them in parts. But the gods did not protest. They remained in their silence, and even as the modern world intruded lights, cameras, whispers in foreign tongues, the chamber retained its stillness, as if time itself hesitated at the threshold. What did these gods know, these eternal observers? What had they seen in the boy's life? What had they guarded in his death? Perhaps they still remember the moment his breath ceased. Perhaps they saw his car separate from his body and step forward into their realm. Or perhaps they remember something older. Something not yet spoken, a secret not of Tutankhamun but of those who placed him here, a truth that required the silence of gods and the patience of centuries. As we linger in this sacred space, we begin to feel it, not fear, but reverence, a weightless pressure in the air, the feeling that we are being observed, not judged, not punished, simply seen. And now, dreamer, as we bow to these divine forms and leave their chamber of quiet authority, we are drawn to another mystery that rests beside the king's body, not a god, not a guardian, but a mask that has captivated the world, and behind it, a story waiting to be unveiled. It glowed beneath the torchlight like the surface of a still pond kissed by dawn, a face serene, symmetrical, eternal, cheekbones curved with divine elegance, lips gently pressed as though holding a secret. The golden funerary mask of Tutankhamun, an icon recognized across the world, was the first to greet Carter's eyes as he beheld the innermost coffin. And yet, beneath the awe and beauty, a whisper lingered, a subtle, persistent suggestion that this was not the boy king's true face. The mask, composed of beaten gold, inlaid with lapis lazuli, obsidian, carnelian, and turquoise, was a masterpiece of the 18th dynasty's sacred craft. Upon the forehead, the uraeus and vulture symbols of Upper and Lower Egypt proclaimed the pharaoh's sovereignty. Over the 2 lands, the stripes of blue and gold that adorned the Nenes headdress shimmered like the ripples of the Nile under starlight. It was majestic, but also mismatched. For decades after its discovery, the mask was assumed to be a perfect likeness, a portrait of Tutankhamun himself. But as techniques of analysis evolved and new eyes examined old treasures, details began to emerge that hinted at a deeper story. The first clue came from a line at the edge of the face, almost imperceptible, yet present, a subtle weld, hidden beneath layers of gold leaf. Some experts suggested the face and headdress were forged separately, joined together only at the final stage of construction, a common technique, perhaps, but not without implications. Then came the inscription. On the back of the mask, just beneath the protective spells carved into the gold surface, was the cartouche bearing Tutankhamun's throne name, Nebkheper. But scholars noticed something strange. The cartouche appeared altered, not freshly etched, but reworked. Under magnification, traces of an earlier name could be seen, Ankheper Nefertiti, the name of a mysterious ruler, possibly a female pharaoh, possibly Nefertiti, who may have ruled as co-regent or as king in her own right during the final years of the Amarna period. Could it be that Tutankhamun's famous mask had once been made for someone else? The theory, once whispered among specialists, began to gather weight. The facial structure, long, elegant, high cheekbone, bore the hallmarks of Nefertiti's known imagery, not the more youthful, rounder features depicted in Tutankhamun's statues and carvings, and the earholes pierced in a fashion unusual for male depictions suggested. The mask was originally crafted for a woman. If true, then the most iconic image of Egypt's golden boy king may not have been his at all. But why? Why would a mask fit for another be placed upon the head of a king? To understand, we must return to the chaos of the time. Tutankhamun died young, perhaps at age 18 or 19. His death was sudden. The royal workshops had little time to prepare the elaborate funerary trappings demanded by tradition. The tomb itself was hastily carved, its chambers small, its paint still drying when the body was interred. In such haste, artisans and priests may have turned to what was available, treasures already made, awaiting their intended ruler, now unused due to the political upheaval that followed Akhenaten's reign. The mask, then, may have been repurposed, fashioned for the boy king, its inscriptions re-etched, its divine features offered as a stand-in for the real. And yet, this substitution was not careless. It was done with reverence, with intention. The mask remained not just a royal ornament, but a spiritual device. For to the Egyptians, a mask was more than a representation, it was a channel. Through the mask, the deceased could breathe, see, and speak in the afterlife. It was both a shield and a doorway, a portal through which the soul might commune with the divine. Even if it bore another's features, it still functioned as a vessel. And perhaps the choice to use Nefertiti's likeness, indeed it was hers, was itself symbolic. She had been the wife of Akhenaten, the queen of the sun cult, and perhaps a pharaoh herself. Her image was one of divine beauty, of mystical authority. In giving Tutankhamun her mask, the priests may have been sealing him within the lineage of gods, aligning him with sacred power, and ensuring his passage through the duat would not be hindered by his youth or the politics of his reign. The irony is exquisite. The mask, now known across the world as Tutankhamun's face, may forever bear the visage of another. And in doing so, it reminds us that identity, in the ancient world, was fluid, shaped not only by blood or birth, but by the divine essence one carried through life and into death. The face that was not his, became his. And in becoming his, it became eternal. As we gaze upon this golden visage, whether in a museum hall, a book's glossy page, or the dream space of imagination, we are gazing not at a single king, but at the layered spirit of Egypt itself, shifting, adapting, whispering. And so, dreamer, we now pass through the final veil that separates gold from silence, and enter a space not adorned, but forgotten, a corridor filled not with treasures, but with unfinished walls, where another kind of mystery awaits. Beyond the gilded chambers, past the solemn statues and painted gods, there exists a passage that leads not to glory but to silence, a corridor cut into stone, narrow and incomplete. No golden coffers here, no sacred geometry, just bare walls, coarse and uneven, as if the artisans who carved them had stopped mid-stroke, tools still in hand. This was the corridor of incompletion, the hallway that was never finished. When Howard Carter's team first entered it, they were struck not by what they saw, but by what was missing. Unlike other royal tombs in the Valley of the King's grand sprawling labyrinths adorned with celestial maps and hymns to the sun, Tutankhamun's tomb seemed stunted, truncated, as if the blueprint had been forgotten or abandoned. The passage from the entrance stairway led directly to an antechamber and then to the burial chamber itself. It was a compressed layout, unusual for a pharaoh. There were only 4 main rooms, no long corridors, no annexes of ritual grandeur, and this particular hallway, barely more than an entrance shaft, bore none of the elaborate iconography that one would expect. No stars adorned its ceiling, no deities lined its flanks, no spells from the Book of Gates or the Amtwit, only raw plaster, rough chisel marks, and the occasional patch of rushed pigment now faded with time. For decades, Egyptologists debated why. Why would a king's tomb, one meant to serve as his eternal palace, be so plain, so unadorned, so clearly unfinished? The first and most accepted theory points to urgency. Tutankhamun died unexpectedly, likely without a fully prepared tomb of his own. The traditional royal tombs took years, sometimes decades to complete, involving thousands of workers, complex theological planning, and the alignment of architecture with the stars. But the boy king's death left no time, and so, an existing tomb possibly meant for a lesser noble or even a high priest was repurposed, its dimensions adjusted, its orientation realigned, its decorations hastily applied. It became, in a matter of months, the resting place for the son of Ammon. This explains much, and yet, not everything, because within this rough corridor, archaeologists began to notice anomalies. In certain areas of plaster, faint tracings, ghostly lines barely visible to the naked eye suggested that decorative work had been planned. Measurements for friezes, guidelines for painted columns, even sketched outlines of what might have been deities, but they were never completed. Some were only partially incised, others were painted over in blank pigment, as if to hide their abandonment. It was not that the corridor was forgotten, it had been interrupted, Was it death that interrupted it, or something else? A few researchers believe that the decision to stop decorating was not merely due to time constraints, but part of a deeper ritual logic, that the abruptness of the space its rawness was meant to reflect a liminal threshold, a boundary between life and death, a place not for display, but for transition. In ancient Egyptian cosmology, thresholds were sacred. Doorways, corridors, passageways, they were places of becoming. The soul passed through them, shed its earthly skin, transformed. In this sense, the unadorned corridor becomes not a floor, but a mystical veil, one that the living were not meant to embellish, one that could only be completed by the soul itself, walking toward the afterlife. Carter's team also uncovered, within the dust of the hallway, fragments of tools, broken chisels, bits of plaster, and even what seemed to be a worker's stool. These were not placed as offerings, they were left as if the workmen had departed suddenly, never to return. Were they called away to tend to another burial? Were they silenced by decree? Or did they leave for reasons no scroll will ever record? Some believe that political turmoil played a role, that after the king's burial, the priests and artisans were forbidden to continue. As the new regime sought to erase Tutankhamun's memory, his name struck from records, his monuments dismantled. His tomb, though completed in body, was left incomplete in spirit. And yet, it is precisely this incompletion that preserved the tomb. Its modesty concealed its importance. Its unfinished corridor masked the treasures beyond. Had the hallway been completed with grandeur, it may have drawn the attention of looters across centuries. Instead, it remained hidden, like a dream half forgotten in morning light. Today, when visitors walk through replicas of the tomb, or when scholars examine digital reconstructions, this hallway continues to evoke quiet awe, not for what it shows, but for what it chooses not to. It is a blank canvas, a silence between notes, and in that silence, one can imagine the footfalls of priests, the low murmur of final prayers, the moment the final torch was extinguished, and the boy king was left alone, watched only by the gods. The hallway, in its rough walls and quiet curves, became a womb of eternity unfinished by men, but perhaps completed by the universe itself. Now, dear dreamer, let us pass through this threshold, not with haste, but with humility, for the next chamber offers not gold or cloth, but something more intangible, scent, sound, subtle traces of the rituals that once filled this space with sacred life. Long after the torches had burned low, long after the tomb was sealed with plaster and prayers, something remained in the darkness, not sound, not light, but scent, subtle, spectral, persistent, a perfume of memory woven into the very air. When Howard Carter first opened the sealed door to Tutankhamun's burial chamber in 1922, he did not only see, he smelled. Reports from the time speak of a sweet, heavy aroma, as if the tomb had been imbued with the fragrance of eternity itself. After more than 3,000 years sealed in silence, the air still carried the perfume of sacred oils, the scent of embalming resins, and the delicate whisper of dried lotus blossoms. It was as if the rituals had only just ended. The ancient Egyptians believed that scent was not merely sensual, it was spiritual. Fragrance had power. It could summon gods, repel demons, cleanse the soul. Every stage of the mummification and burial process was infused with aromatic purpose. Each oil chosen for its divine correspondence, each resin blended to preserve not only flesh, but essence. The body of Tutankhamun was bathed in unguents, mixtures of oils, fats, resins, and incense. These were applied over many days during the embalming process, saturating the linen wrappings, seeping into the sarcophagus, and eventually hardening into dark, glossy layers around the king's remains. Modern examinations of the mummy revealed that this process had been unusually intense. The amount of oil used was excessive, to the point that it charred the body. Some scholars suggest it was a mistake, a result of inexperience or haste. Others propose it was intentional, a form of divine anointing, a final act of spiritual embalming meant to protect the king in ways not just physical, but cosmic. Among the ingredients found in the tomb were cedar oil, juniper resin, myrrh, frankincense, and pistachia, resin materials sourced from distant lands. Along the trade routes that stretched from Nubia to Punt, from the Levant to the incense roads of Arabia, these were not random perfumes, they were messages. Each carried a sacred meaning. Cedar, drawn from the sacred trees of Lebanon, was associated with purity and strength. Myrrh, dark and bitter, was tied to the mourning of Isis and the passage into the underworld. Frankincense, with its sweet, rising smoke, symbolized prayer ascending to the heavens. Juniper, cleansing and sharp, was used to ward off evil. Lotus, crushed and steeped in oil, evoked rebirth, a flower that blooms from the mud. The tomb was thus a chamber of scent, an invisible temple where the senses were guided not by what could be seen, but by what could be felt through breath. And it was not only the body that was anointed. The furniture, shabti, figurines, canopic jars, and even the golden coffins bore traces of aromatic resin. The shrines that encased the sarcophagus were sealed with black pitcher tar-like substance that both secured and sanctified. This was not merely glue, it was a fragrant seal, a bond of scent and symbol. Even the food offerings trays of dates, nuts, figs, and wine carried their own perfumes, sealed in alabaster vessels still scented with the faint breath of ancient harvests. As Carter's team catalogued these items, many remarked on the lingering bouquet of the tomb. It became a ghost that haunted the artifacts even after they were removed. In museum storage rooms across Europe, curators noted that the objects retained their distinctive odor for years, a scent that could not be reproduced, a fragrance of ancient devotion. There is something deeply human in this. Long before written word, we remembered through scent, a mother's embrace, a lover's skin, the smoke of home fires, the wild sweetness of flowers in bloom. To the Egyptians, the soul had a nose, just as it had a voice and a heart, and in the afterlife, the deceased would encounter fragrances both blessed and cursed. Their path would be scented, their judgment, too, perfumed. To this day, perfumers and historians have tried to recreate the aroma of Tutankhamun's tomb. Using trace chemical analysis and ancient recipes, they have blended oils and resins, attempting to bottle the essence of that sacred moment in 1922, when time itself seemed to exhale, but none have fully succeeded. Because what lingers in the tomb is more than smell. It is presence, the olfactory fingerprint of a civilization that believed scent could bridge the worlds, that perfume could speak where words failed, that a single drop of oil, placed upon the brow of a king, could carry him beyond death. As you breathe in now, imagine that first breath taken in the tomb, heavy, sweet, ancient, a sigh of eternity, the scent of the gods, the breath of embalming priests, the perfume of passage. Now let us follow that breath further, still to the canopic shrine, where not the body, but the essence of the king was divided, preserved, and protected by 4 powerful goddesses. In the sacred science of the ancient Egyptians, death was never an ending, but a careful unraveling, a process by which the soul was disentangled from the body, and each sacred part prepared for its journey beyond the veil. This was not only a matter of belief, it was ritual architecture, and nowhere was that more clearly expressed than in the protection of the king's inner organs. In the tomb of Tutankhamun, nestled beside the walls of the antechamber, stood a shrine like no other. Small in comparison to the towering golden shrines of the burial chamber, it nonetheless radiated a quiet importance. This was the canopic shrine, a miniature temple made of gilded wood, guarded at each corner by 4 divine beings. It was within this shrine that the boy king's liver, lungs, stomach, and intestines were Placici organs separately embalmed, perfumed, wrapped in linen, and enclosed within a tiny coffin. And each of those coffins was shaped not simply as a container, but as a likeness of Tutankhamun himself, his young face rendered in gold, serene and eternal. The organ coffins were made of alabaster, translucent and softly glowing in the dim tomb light, smooth to the touch, yet dense with mystery. They were arranged carefully within a canopic chest of chalcedon, object of pure symmetry, divided into 4 compartments, each chamber sealed with a stopper shaped like the king's head, staring outward in solemn contemplation. But it was not these coffins alone that protected him, it was the goddesses. Standing at each corner of the shrine were 4 divine figures, carved with exquisite detail and coated in gold leaf: Isis, Nephthys, Selkut, and Neith, their arms outstretched, wings drawn around the chest as though embracing it. Each stood still, yet vibrated with the silent power of devotion. These were not mere attendants, they were guardians of essence. Isis, the great mother, wife of Osiris, protectress of the throne, guarded the liver. Nephthys, sister of Isis, keeper of lamentation and shadow, shielded the lungs. Selkut, goddess of scorpions and magic, known for her soothing hands, watched over the intestines. Neith, warrior, goddess and weaver of the world, held vigil over the stomach. Each goddess was linked not only to an organ, but to one of the 4 sons of Horus, divine protectors whose visages adorned the canopic stoppers: Imseti for the liver, Hopi for the lungs, Duamutef for the stomach, Kebesanuf for the intestines. Together, goddess and son formed a circular sacred alliance encircling the core of the pharaoh's being. But what, you might ask, of the heart? Curiously, when modern scientists examined Tutankhamun's remains, they found something strange. The heart long believed by Egyptians to be the seat of thought, emotion, and soul was missing, not just removed for embalming, as was customary, but entirely absent, gone. Some believe it was lost during mummification, damaged by the excess resin poured upon the body. Others suggest a more chilling possibility, that the heart was intentionally removed as part of a political or religious punishment, a way to deny the king full entry into the afterlife, to rob him of the very organ that would be weighed against the feather of Mat in the Hall of Judgment. If so, then the role of the goddesses becomes even more poignant, for, in the absence of the heart, they became his protectors in a more profound way, guarding what remained of his essence, defending his journey, despite what had been taken from him, and perhaps they were successful. For even though his heart was missing, Tutankhamun's memory endured. Though his name was erased, it returned. Though his tomb was hidden, it was found. Perhaps the goddesses never ceased their vigil. Their golden arms remain today, wrapped eternally around that small canopic shrine, displayed in museums where the air is sterile and the light artificial, but their gaze is undimmed. They are not there for us, they are there for him. There is something sacred in this act of eternal protection, something deeply human. To take the parts of someone we love and hold them close. To believe that no matter what is lost, something essential can still be preserved, still be defended. The Egyptians understood this, and so they left not only gold and spells but guardians. Let us now leave the shrine, still warm with divine presence, and step once more into the realm of the unknown. Ahead lies the most puzzling mystery of all, not what was placed in the tomb, but what was hidden beneath it. The tomb had already revealed its wonders: golden chariots and lion thrones, meteoric daggers and alabaster jars, statues, shrines, and the now immortal mask. And yet, as the decades passed, a growing sense of incompletion lingered, as though the story of Tutankhamun's burial had not yet fully unfolded. In 2015, almost a century after the tomb's discovery, that whisper returned not from the artifacts, but from the walls themselves. A British Egyptologist named Nicholas Reeves proposed a radical theory, one that sent shivers through the world of archaeology and reawakened the dreamers of hidden history. Using higher-resolution scans and infrared imaging of the tomb's walls, Reeves noticed something strange. Beneath the golden mural on the north wall, the very wall that depicted Tutankhamun's burial rites, there appeared to be traces of a doorway. Not painted, but built over. Delicate lines, subtle contours. A rectangular void beneath the layers of pigment and plaster. A sealed threshold, hidden in plain sight. Could it be another chamber? Excitement surged. The tomb, it seemed, had not yet finished speaking. Reeves' theory drew upon more than scanning technology. He observed that the burial chamber's decoration, particularly the wall motifs, bore striking stylistic resemblance not to Tutankhamun's other artifacts, but to those linked with Queen Nefertiti, the elusive royal figure whose fate remains one of Egyptology's greatest mysteries. The suggestion was daring, that Nefertiti, possibly Tutankhamun's stepmother, possibly a pharaoh in her own right, may be buried within a hidden annex of the boy king's tomb. Such an idea was not only compelling, it was theologically plausible. In the tradition of Egyptian burials, tombs were often expanded, chambers were modified, successors added to predecessors. If Nefertiti had ruled under the name Neferuiten, and if her burial had been prepared during a time of religious and political flux, then her interment may have been deliberately concealed, folded into another burial as a way of protecting her legacy or hiding it. The evidence was circumstantial, but it shimmered with possibility. Further scans, including radar analysis, appeared to support the idea that void's potential chambers existed beyond the walls. Some scans showed differences in density. Others hinted at hidden doorframes beneath the murals. The technology, however, was inconclusive. Egyptian authorities, cautious and bound by layers of bureaucratic and cultural protocols, permitted limited investigation, but no physical breach was made. The wall remained intact, the silence unbroken. And so, a hidden chamber, if it exists at all, remains just beyond the threshold, undisturbed, unconfirmed, yet deeply felt. Perhaps that is as it should be, because this chamber, whether real or metaphorical, speaks in another language, one not of stone or pigment, but of possibility. It reminds us that every tomb holds layers unseen, that history does not surrender its secrets all at once, that time conceals what it must, until we are ready to understand. There is also something deeply poetic in the idea that Tutankhamun, once nearly erased from history, might now guard the final resting place of the woman who helped shape his world. Imagine her there, beyond the painted veil, her features still, her crown intact, her essence preserved in silence. Perhaps her spirit watches us through the wall, smiling gently at our uncertainty. Or perhaps the hidden chamber is empty. Perhaps it was carved but never used. Or perhaps it exists only in the minder projection of longing, a hope that the tomb still has one more secret to give. And even if there is no physical chamber, the idea of it now haunts the tomb like a second ghost, an invisible annex, a silence that thickens the air, a question that lingers in the torchlight. Tutankhamun's tomb was always about more than treasure. It was about memory, preservation, layers of meaning folded into space. This potential chamber, this non-room has already become part of the legend, and perhaps that is the message it whispers, that some mysteries are not meant to be solved, only sensed. We walk past the painted wall now, its figures as calm as ever, the gods face outward, the priests bow low, Tutankhamun stands, anointed, and behind him, a pause, a breath, a door that may, or may not, be real, a silence that speaks without words. Let us now step away from architecture, and descend into the deeper symbolism of the tomb's layout, for even its structure, its direction, and its very shape may hold messages meant for eternity. To step into the tomb of Tutankhamun is to step into a blueprint, not just of stone and plaster, but of cosmic order. Every angle, every chamber, every axis within this modest sepulchre, whispers of a world where death was not a descent, but a geometric ascent into eternity. Unlike the vast and winding tombs of other pharaohs, Tutankhamun's final resting place is strikingly compact for principal rooms arranged in an irregular orientation, and yet, this simplicity is deceptive, for even in its rushed construction and constrained design, the tomb mirrors the sacred logic that governed the architecture of the cosmos itself. In ancient Egyptian thought, architecture was never neutral. It was ritual and form, a shaping of space to reflect the shape of the unseen world. Temples were built to mirror the mound of creation rising from the primordial waters. Tombs were designed as portals anchored in earth, but aimed toward the stars. Tutankhamun's tomb is no exception. Its entrance stairway, descending from the valley's surface, leads not just downward, but inward into the body of the earth, like a symbolic return to the womb of the goddess Nut, the Sky Mother who swallowed the sun each night and birthed it anew each dawn. The descent is abrupt. Unlike the long sloping corridors of later tombs, the passage to the antechamber is immediate, as though time has been compressed. Within seconds, the outer world vanishes. Dust and heat give way to cool shadow. The transition is visceral. The antechamber, the first room encountered by Carter, was a space of chaos and abundance. Furniture, chariots, weapons, and statues were piled high not carelessly, but symbolically. This space, some scholars believe, represented the realm of the living world, the tools and objects Tutankhamun used in life, now carried with him to serve in death. Beyond it, the burial chamber, the spiritual heart of the tomb, lay oriented along an east-west axis, aligning the king's final slumber with the path of the sun god Ra. To die in Egypt was to journey with Ra into the western horizon, into the Duat, the underworld, and to rise again in the east, reborn. The architecture of the tomb mirrors this passage. The king's face, mummified and masked, was turned to the east, awaiting rebirth. But the chamber is also framed by a deeper geometry. The four nested shrines that encased his sarcophagus were perfect rectangles, growing in size, each fitting within the next with mathematical precision. They form a sacred box within a sacred box, like the layers of the soul in Egyptian theology. The Ka, the Ba, the Ok, each nested within the body, each unfolding in the afterlife. In this way, the tomb becomes not just a container of remains, but a map of the self. Even the ceiling of the burial chamber was decorated not with elaborate scenes, but with a deep indigo sky speckled with golden stars, a representation of the heavens, eternal and unchanging. Tutankhamun, resting below them, was thus placed beneath the night sky of the gods, as though his tomb had pierced the rock and opened onto the celestial ocean. The annex, a smaller side room off the antechamber, held more magical items, oils, amulets, tools, and games. To the untrained eye, it seemed disordered, but to the ancients, it was a space of preparation, where the soul gathered what it needed to face the perils of the Duat. And then, the treasury. Here, directly across from the burial chamber, stood the great canopic shrine we explored earlier. The placement is meaningful. In Egyptian architecture, the north was associated with the imperishable stars, the realm of the undying gods. The fact that the treasury lies in this direction aligns the organs of the king with the realm of celestial permanence. But beyond these spatial associations lies a more mystical interpretation. Some believe the entire tomb was laid out to mirror the four cardinal directions, rumor compass point of the soul's journey. The west, the direction of the setting sun and death. The east, of rebirth and resurrection. The north, of immortality. The south, of the underworld's deepest gates. By this model, the tomb becomes a ritual diagram, a mandala of stone through which the king ascended, not bodily, but spiritually, into the stars. Even the supposed limitations of the tomb, its small size, its rapid construction, seemed to take on meaning. Perhaps the simplicity was not a failure, but a form of distillation, a refinement, a final act of piety, where only the essential elements were included. And if we view the tomb not as a monument, but as a machine for immortality, then its design begins to make sense. It is a vessel, a resonant chamber, a crafted silence into which incantations were poured, and from which a soul might rise. When Carter stood in the burial chamber, he was not simply in a room, he was inside a cosmic mechanism, a spatial invocation designed to last not for centuries, but for eternity. And now, as we return to the antechamber and feel the cool stone beneath our feet, let us pause. For in the next chapter we shall gaze upon an object that seems out of place in all this sacred geometry, a mundane item, a piece of furniture, and yet, one that may carry the most human mystery of all. Amid the splendor of gold shrines and painted gods, amid the sacred oils and alabaster jars, there was one object in Tutankhamun's tomb that seemed oddly simple, humble, even, not encrusted with jewels, not crafted of precious metal, a piece of furniture, carved of wood and folded like the wings of a sleeping bird. It was a bed, folded at the edges of the antechamber, half buried in dust. It rested quietly among ceremonial chariots, fans, and ivory game boards. Carter and his team almost passed it by, compared to the great funerary couch shaped like a cow, or the lion-headed thrones. This small, foldable bed lacked grandeur, and yet, it was one of the most human objects in the tomb. The Egyptians believed that, in the afterlife, the soul would need to rest just as it had in life. The dead would not drift forever in static silence. They would walk, they would eat, they would sleep. The afterlife was a mirror world, a perfected version of existence, filled with pleasure and joy, but still familiar. And so, they prepared accordingly. Tutankhamun was buried with 3 beds, each distinct in form and decoration. But it was the gilded folding bed that captured the attention of historians. Crafted of wood, possibly acacia or sycamore, it was coated in gold leaf, now flaking with time. Its legs were shaped like animal limbs, elegant, curved, as though a gazelle had laid down to sleep. Unlike rigid ceremonial couches, this bed could be folded, its joints cleverly fashioned, its weight balanced. It was a bed not for display, but for use, and this raised a question. Was it not made for the tomb at all? Was it, perhaps, a bed he had used in life? Some scholars believe so. Its wear patterns, the way its frame had warped ever so slightly with time, suggested that it had not been crafted freshly for burial. It had age, a history, a familiarity. If this is true, then within the heart of the tomb lay not just a funerary item, but a fragment of the boy himself, a place where he had slept, perhaps as a child, perhaps when his bones ached and his breath was shallow, a bed upon which he had dreamed. There is an almost unbearable tenderness in this idea. The folding bed, so quiet among the relics of empire, becomes a whisper of humanity. In its grain is the memory of breath. In its joints, the ghost of comfort. And perhaps, when the tomb was sealed, and the priests chanted their final spells, it was not the golden shrines or statues that called to the king's spirit, but this his own resting place. One can imagine the scene, the tomb freshly sealed, darkness absolute, silence wrapping the chambers like linen, and somewhere in the eternal stillness, a breeze of soul drifting back toward something known, a familiar curve of wood, the scent of its frame, the way it held the body not as treasure, but as home. In Egyptian theology, the Ba or soul was a mobile spirit. It could fly, it could revisit places, it could return to the tomb, perch upon the corpse, or roam the fields of the afterlife. And when it returned, it needed a place to rest. This bed was that place, not for ceremony, not for kingship, but for peace. Perhaps that is why it was included among the sacred items. The priests, for all their chanting and gilded preparation, understood something deeper, that no matter how divine a king may be, he was still a boy, still a son, still a dreamer who had once coiled beneath linen and fallen asleep under the stars. And so, they placed his bed beside him, so he would not be alone. Even now, as we look upon its cracked frame behind museum glass, it radiates warmth, the kind of warmth not found in gold, but in memory, in quietude, in the sacred intimacy of rest. It is fitting, then, that you are here, dear dreamer, listening in the quiet, wrapped in night, for the boy king, too, sleeps. And perhaps, through the threads of time, you're dreaming in his touch for a moment. Now, let us move from sleep to sound, for beyond the resting bed lies another mystery, a music that no longer plays, but whose silence still vibrates. In the stillness of the tomb, where scent had faded and light never touched the walls for thousands of years, one might not expect to find music. And yet, nestled among the chariots, baskets, and boxes of Tutankhamun's antechamber, Carter's team uncovered something startling, delicate, improbable: musical instruments. They were not many and they were not lavish, but they were there, tangible echoes of sound now silenced by the weight of centuries. Their presence in the tomb offers us not noise, but a ghost of vibration, a memory of tone, a resonance that transcends the absence of air. Among the finds were 2 trumpets, one of silver, the other of bronze and gold. Both instruments were relatively short, just over half a meter in length. Their bells flared like lilies, their tubes engraved with the protective figures of Ptah, Ra, and Amun. They were not ceremonial replicas, they were functional instruments. And when, in 1939, the BBC broadcast a performance in which a military trumpeter played them live on air for the first and only time since antiquity, the world trembled with wonder. The moment was electric. The silver trumpet's tone was harsh, piercing, almost mournful. The bronze trumpet, warmer, deeper, reverberated like the breath of stone temples. But even as the notes rang out, the trumpet cracked. Its body split along a seam not designed for the strain of modern air pressure. It had spoken, and then, like a whisper too long held, it fell silent again. Scholars debate the purpose of the trumpets. Some suggest they were used for ceremonial processions to announce the king's presence, or to signal transitions in ritual. Others believe they were intended for the afterlife itself, to call the gods or summon the Ba'a, the spirit soul, across the veil of death. The imagery engraved on them reinforces this. These were not instruments of war or parade. They were divine tools, conduits of sacred sound. And then there were the sister-rattles used in temple worship, associated with Hathor, goddess of love, music, and rebirth. Though no complete sistra were found in the tomb, fragments of ivory and faience, curved like serpents, hint at their presence. They would have made a delicate chiming noise, like the wings of 1,000 butterflies brushing against stone. It is believed that such sounds accompanied rituals of transition, designed to soothe the soul, to call forth deities, to create harmony between worlds. No harps were discovered, though they were common in courtly life. Perhaps Tutankhamun's harps were left behind in the palace, or broken by time. But the presence of percussive shells, polished and arranged in small containers, suggests that rhythm had a place even in death. These instruments, simple, perishable, were not buried for entertainment, they were sound offerings. In Egyptian theology, creation itself began with vibration. The first cry of the god, the utterance of the primordial word, was believed to have shaped the world. Music, then, was not leisure, it was magic. And so, to place instruments in the tomb was to embed within it a mechanism of rebirth. A means for the king's voice, or the god's breath, to be heard again in the darkness. One wonders, did the priests play these instruments during the burial rites? Did a final blast from the trumpet accompany the sealing of the tomb? Did a sistrum rattle once, gently, in farewell? Or were they never played at all, left intentionally silent, to be sounded only in the afterlife? It is perhaps more haunting to imagine that these instruments were meant not for ritual, but for companionship. That the boy king, who had known the music of flutes and chants in the court of Akhatan or Thebes, might wish to carry those tones with him into eternity. Music was his memory, his connection to the world of the living, a way for the past to sing to him, even as he journeyed forward into fields of reeds and golden light. And in this silence we find a mystery deeper than gold or stone. What is the music of the dead? Not the wail of grief, not the silence of absence, but the eternal hum of continuity, the rhythm of transformation, the melody of return. Today, the trumpets lie behind glass. The sistrum fragments are catalogued, their tones lost, but in the imagination of the dreamer they still play, softly, just beneath waking, a note held beyond time, a sound that lives, though never heard again. And so, from these silent melodies, we turn now to the figures who served the king beyond death, not musicians, but helpers of another kind, small in stature, countless in number, and each one carved to perform a task for their master. In the dim glow of torchlight, nestled in alcoves and cabinets, lining the shadowed walls of Tutankhamun's tomb, stood an army, not of soldiers, not of scribes, but of servants silent, still, and sculpted by hand. There were over 400 of them, some no taller than a finger, others as long as a forearm, crafted of wood, faience, limestone, or clay. These were the shabtis, the workers of the afterlife, guardians of labor, servants of the dead, and each one bore a name, Tutankhamun's name. The ancient Egyptians believed that in the realm beyond life, the soul would be called upon to perform tasks, to cultivate the fields of Osiris, to irrigate the canals of the field of reeds, to serve the gods in temples that stretched across eternity. It was not enough to die, one had to work in paradise. But the pharaoh was divine, and thus required helper spirits who would rise in his place and answer the call when the god summoned. That was the purpose of the shabti. The word itself means answerer. Each figure was inscribed with a short spell, often from chapter 6 of the Book of the Dead, commanding, "O shabti, if I am called upon to do labor in the realm of the dead, say instead, I will do it. I am here." And so, the shabtis were not decorative. They were substitutes of action, tools of transformation. In Tutankhamun's tomb, the shabtis were arranged with care, some placed in ornate boxes, others lined in rows, standing shoulder to shoulder like quiet sentinels. A few were clothed in miniature linen wrappings, their bodies painted with tulsos, baskets, yoksas, if midlabur. Some even wore tiny headbands and bore hieroglyphs on their torsos, titles, duties, spells, but not all were equal. Among the 413 shabtis found, a hierarchy could be discerned. There were 36 overseers, each holding a whip or baton of command, 365 workers, one for each day of the solar year, 12 supervisors, possibly for the months, and a handful of ceremonial shabtis carved in fine detail and made of precious materials, perhaps symbolic representations of divine roles. It is a vision not of domination, but of eternal administration, a celestial bureaucracy, a kingdom still functioning in the afterlife, with the pharaoh at its center. But there was more to these figures than their roles, their faces. Many were sculpted in the likeness of the king: broad cheeks, almond eyes, a calm, otherworldly smile. Others were more generic, with stylized features and rounded forms, but all shared a kind of serenity, as if they knew their purpose and awaited it without fear. Some were made of faience, a material of glazed silica, shimmering blue-green like water under moonlight. Faience was sacreder, substance believed to harness the essence of life and rebirth. A shabti made of faience was not just a servant, it was a vessel of magic. Others were carved from wood, smoothed and painted, their colors faded but still present. The grain of the wood, once from trees along the Nile or imported from distant lands, added a breath of nature to their stillness. One shabti found within a shrine of its own was carved with extraordinary care, its tiny features flawless, its paint intact. It bore the face of the boy king himself, and in its hands, a pair of miniature hoes. Imagine this figure, now sealed in a box for centuries, suddenly awakening as the afterlife unfolds, stepping forward with tools in hand, whispering, "I will do it. I am here." It is not a myth. It is a gesture of devotion written in form, and perhaps, most haunting of all, is the knowledge that real laborers, men and women of the living world, had carved these figurines. Their hands pressed the clay, their tools etched the spells. In this way, their own essence, their own breath, was embedded into the afterlife of the king. They served the pharaoh not only in life, but in forever. And so, these silent clay figures form a bridge not just between worlds, but between the known and the unknown, between the artisan and the divine, between the smallness of the human hand and the vastness of the eternal journey. They are still, yes, but they are not idle. They wait, and in their waiting they teach us something profound. That service, given in faith, can echo through time like a song that never ends. Let us now pass from these waiting hands to another ritual of preparation, the games and toys that accompanied the boy king into death. Not tools of labor, but echoes of joy, perhaps meant to keep his spirit playful as it wandered the stars. Hidden among the chariots and the jars, between the ornate boxes and golden thrones, there lay objects that seemed to whisper of childhood rather than eternity. Game boards, throwing sticks, small carved animals, and ivory playing pieces, fragments of joy, of laughter, of moments lost in the folds of time. These were not merely symbolic inclusions, they were reminders that Tutankhamun had been a boy, a child raised in a palace where politics thundered outside marble walls, but within which he may have giggled, competed, and played. And in the afterlife, Just as in life, a king needed more than laborers and priests. He needed the divine spark of delight. Chief among these relics was a beautifully crafted Senate board. Senat, whose name means passing, was not merely a game, it was a metaphor, a contest of movement across 30 squares arranged in 3 rows of 10, where players raced their tokens through danger and reward. But more than that, Senat was a ritual of transition, symbolizing the soul's journey through the perils of the underworld and toward the field of reeds. Tutankhamun's Senut set was no casual toy. Made of ebony and ivory, with squares inlaid in gold and glass, it included slender playing pieces and throwing sticks to determine movement, sticks that clattered softly like bones across wood, whispering fate. The game's rules have been lost to time, though echoes remain in later texts and in the illustrations on tomb walls. Some squares offered blessings, others curses. A wrong move could send the soul back to the start. A right one could lift it into immortality. To place a note in the afterlife was to negotiate rebirth. It was said that the gods themselves played it, that Thoth, the ibis-headed deity of knowledge, played Senut against the moon, that Ra, god of the sun, challenged Set across the cosmic board each night. And so, when Tutankhamun was buried with his Senut set, it was not to pass idle time, it was to engage with the divine, to rehearse the game of death, to sharpen his strategy for the duat. But not all games in the tomb were so serious. Other finds included boomerang-like throwing sticks, perhaps for hunting birds or playing skill games, and small animal figurines carved from ivory and painted with care leopards, gazelles, lions, toys, rituals, or something in between. There were also knuckle bones, similar to dice, used in games of chance, or perhaps for divination, and cubit rods marked with etching stools for measurement, yes, but also possibly for games of alignment, where harmony and number intersected like stars on the horizon. These items remind us of the child behind the mask, the young king who ascended the throne at 9, whose spine may have ached, whose gait may have limped, whose days were wrapped in royal linen and heavy expectation. He, too, once rolled dice, once moved pieces, once cheered a small victory beneath a setting sun. One ivory box found in the tomb, painted with delicate images of flowers and birds, contained a scattering of game pieces and carved toys. Perhaps they were placed there by someone who had known the boy not as a pharaoh, but as a son, a friend, a child. And perhaps, just perhaps, they hoped that in the afterlife, he would find joy again. Not the grandeur of rule, not the gravity of ritual, but the innocence of play. For in Egyptian thought, eternity was not meant to be solemn, it was meant to be complete. A life carried forward, perfected, whole. And what is wholeness without joy? To give the king games was to say, may you laugh again, may you play among the gods, may your spirit move with the swiftness of a child across the eternal board of being. And so we leave the Senate board in its place, the game pieces waiting, the throwing sticks beside them, still awaiting a hand, a spirit, a spark. Now we pass from the games of the living to the reflections of the dead, four within a box carved of cedar and lined in ebony. Carter's team discovered a set of mirrors and cosmetics, items not of vanity but of ritual appearance. It was round and polished, cool to the touch, and dark as obsidian. A mirror, but not one made of glass. Not a tool of vanity, but a portal of vision. In Tutankhamun's tomb, Carter discovered several mirrors and cosmetic items, carefully stored in boxes, wrapped in linen, preserved for eternity. To the modern eye, these may appear as personal effects, a king's grooming kit, prepared for use beyond the grave. But in ancient Egyptian belief, the mirror was not merely for reflection, it was for revelation. Most of the mirrors found in Egyptian tombs were made not of silver, but of bronze or gold, highly polished to a radiant shine. Tutankhamun's included both smooth discs mounted on ivory or ebony handles, some shaped like ankhs, the symbol of life. Their backs were often engraved with lotus flowers, winged deities, or the eyes of Horus. To gaze into one was not to see oneself, but to see through oneself. The mirror, to the ancients, was a threshold, a place where the car might recognize itself, where the gods might reveal their faces, where visions of the next world might flicker like starlight on water. It is no accident that the hieroglyph or mirror resembles the sun's disk rising between hills. To look into a mirror was to stand at the edge of dawn, at the place where light meets shadow, life meets death. In funerary texts, mirrors are described as tools of rebirth. They are listed among the items needed to make the soul see again, and were thought to guide the spirit's sight during its passage through the duat. In Tutankhamun's tomb, Several mirrors were found alongside cosmetic jars, containing the faint residues of kohl, unguent, and perfumed oils. These cosmetics were not simply for beauty, they were protective. Kohl, made of galena or antimony, was applied to the eyes not only for appearance but to guard against evil, to reduce glare, to invoke Horus's divine vision. Oils and unguents, made of frankincense, myrrh, and other sacred ingredients, were used to anoint, to prepare the body, to anoint statues of the gods, and to awaken sacred energy within the self. Among the many cosmetic vessels in the tomb, one stood out, a small alabaster jar, carved in the shape of a lotus bud, with petals delicately curled outward. Within it, traces of a dark resin remained, possibly a sacred bomb applied in the final rites of embalming. Another box contained a razor and comb, personal items, yes, but also ritual tools. In temple rites, priests shaved their heads, purified their bodies, and wore perfumes as offerings in themselves. A clean body was a vessel fit to receive the gods. And so it was with the mirrors, the cosmetics, the grooming items. They were not for display. They were instruments of transformation. Just as the mummified body was wrapped, painted, and masked to become more than human, so too was the spirit adorned for its passage through light. But what did he see, this boy king, as his soul passed beyond? Did the mirror reflect his face as he had been, or as he was becoming? Did he see the body he had left behind, fragile, twisted by disease, scarred by injury? Or did he see himself as he now was, radiant, unburdened, divine? The mirror may have shown him not what he was, but what he was meant to be. There is something hauntingly beautiful in the idea of the dead looking into mirrors, not to admire, but to remember, to see past illusion, to witness the truth of their essence. Even today, when we look into a mirror, there is a flicker, a moment of disconnection, of wonder, of strangeness. We see ourselves, and yet not ourselves. The Egyptians embraced that feeling. They gave it a name, they gave it ritual. The mirror was a compass for the soul. It pointed not north, but inward. And so, in this quiet chamber filled with vessels and brushes, with discs of bronze that once caught the light of sacred fires, we find not a dressing room, but a sanctuary of identity, a place where the boy king stood before himself, and did not look away. Let us now leave the mirror to its vigil, and follow the scent of incense back to the sarcophagus. There, within the nested coffins, lay another profound mystery, not something present, but something missing, the heart, the sacred seat of judgment. In the intricate architecture of Egyptian belief, the heart was everything. More than a muscle, more than a metaphor. It was the seat of thought, emotion, memory, and truth. The brain, they believed, could be discarded, but the heart, the IB, must be preserved. It was the heart that would be weighed in the hall of two truths, placed on the scale opposite the feather of Marot, goddess of balance and cosmic order. If the heart was found heavy with wrongdoing, it would be devoured by the demon Ammit, part crocodile, lion, and hippopotamus, never to live again. But if light, the soul would pass into eternity. And so, imagine the shock, the deep disturbance, when Carter's team, having peeled back the final layers of linen and resin, discovered that Tutankhamun's heart was gone, not embalmed separately, not buried in the canopic chest, not reduced to dust or shriveled in place, simply missing. The king's body had been badly burned, likely a result of chemical reactions between embalming oils and the linen wrappings. His skin was blackened, his torso collapsed inward. But even in cases of extreme degradation, the heart, a dense, resilient organ, is typically found, or at least its cavity preserved. But in this case, there was no heart cavity. Nothing remained in its place, no organ, no evidence of extraction with intention to preserve. It was as if the heart had been deliberately removed. Its absence, not accidental, but ritual. Some scholars have proposed that the embalmers, facing a rapidly decomposing body, were forced to remove the heart in desperation. Others suggest it was destroyed in the fire-like reaction that consumed the body's wrappings. But if this were so, why was it not replaced with a symbolic substitute? Pharaohs, even in cases of bodily loss, were given heart scarabs, amulets inscribed with spells to compensate for the missing organ. Tutankhamun had none. This silence, this emptiness, suggests not neglect but intent. Could this have been a form of posthumous punishment? To remove the heart was to deny the king his judgment, to prevent his entrance into the afterlife. It was the ultimate theological sanction. If true, the implications are staggering. Tutankhamun, once hailed as the restorer of Mat after the heresies of Akhenaten, may have been viewed by some as tainted, a remnant of a cursed lineage. His premature death, the political tensions that followed, the erasure of his name from monuments, these all point to deliberate marginalization. Perhaps the priests, or a faction within the court, sought to erase him from both history and eternity. But something else happened. The tomb, though hastily constructed, was filled with extraordinary treasures. Rituals were performed, spells were written, guardians were placed, and his name, though struck from records, was never fully forgotten. It was as though there were two narratives unfolding at once. One sought to silence him, the other sought to preserve him. Some have speculated that the heart may have been buried elsewhere, that a secondary tumor, a hidden cache may contain this vital organ, that his body was separated from his essence on purpose, awaiting reunion in the afterlife. Others believe that the missing heart was itself a symbol, that in removing it, the priests hoped to transfer Tutankhamun's identity, his essence, to a higher, purer plane, a metaphysical disembodiment, a preparation for transformation. Whatever the truth, the king's passage into the next world was incomplete, interrupted, an exile within his own tomb, and yet, the silence around his missing heart speaks as loudly as any inscription. It reminds us that memory is not made of flesh, it is made of mystery. In the end, Tutankhamun's name, erased by stone, was revived by sand. His treasures, hidden in haste, became eternal. His body, broken, drew the gaze of the entire world, and his heart, though never found, beats still in the imaginations of all who dare to seek him. Perhaps that is the greatest resurrection of all. Let us now leave the sarcophagus behind, and move deeper into the tomb's cultural echo. For beyond the artifacts and architecture lies another story, the story of those who unearthed him, and the whispers of curse that followed. The tomb was silent, the seal was broken, the dust of 3,000 years stirred in the golden glow of a flickering lamp. And as Howard Carter peered into the burial chamber, history held its breath. But somewhere in the shadows, a whisper began. It did not come from the walls or from the linen-wrapped kings. It came from the world above. A murmur passed from ear to ear, from paper to page, across continents. The whisper took shape as a question, and then as a warning. Was there a curse? To understand this, we must first return to the moment when the tomb was opened, not ceremonially, but truly entered. On the night of February 16, 1923, Carter and Lord Carnarvon breached the burial chamber. It had taken weeks to clear the rubble, to secure permission, to prepare the world. Now, they stood face to face with the sarcophagus. Less than 2 months later, Lord Carnarvon was dead. He had fallen ill from a mosquito bite that turned septic. He died in Cairo on April 5, 1923, at 1:55 a.m. Almost immediately, stories began to emerge. That the lights in Cairo flickered and went out at the moment of his death. That his dog, back in England, howled and collapsed at the same hour. That an inscription had been found above the tomb warning, "Death shall come on swift wings to him who disturbs the king." And so the idea of the curse of the pharaoh took root. Newspapers around the world fanned the flames. The New York Times, the London Times, Le Figaro printed tales of death and mystery. More deaths followed. George J. Gould, a visitor to the tomb, died shortly after. Sir Archibald Douglas Reed, who x-rayed the mummy, died mysteriously. A.C. Mace, Carter's assistant, fell ill and passed away in 1928. Even Carter, years later, died quietly in 1939, after suffering health issues. Of the 58 people present at the tomb's opening, 8 died within a decade. The pattern was irregular, but the whisper never ceased. It became law. But was there truly a curse? No curse inscription was ever found within the tomb. The supposed warning above the door was a fabrication. Egyptologists, historians, and even Carter himself dismissed the idea. Rational explanations abounded: disease, stress, coincidence. And yet, there are deeper ways to understand a curse, not as magic, not as revenge, but as a ripple in sacred time. The ancient Egyptians believed that tombs were charged spaces. To enter them was to cross a boundary, to disturb a harmony carefully constructed by priests and gods. The tomb was not a container of remains, but a chamber of balance. To break the seal was to alter the energy. And sometimes, when balance is broken, something unseen responds. There is evidence that the tomb may have contained toxic molds, aspergillus and other fungal spores sealed for millennia, released when walls were disturbed. Others have suggested long-degraded chemicals from embalming oils and decayed resins. The tomb was filled with organics, wood, textiles, dried foods. Inhalation of their breakdown could bring illness. But none of these explanations fully silence the whisper, because the idea of the curse lives not in fact, but in feeling. It is born in the flickering candlelight over the mask, in the hush of the burial chamber, in the moment when a human hand dares to touch what was meant for eternity, and that feeling has followed Tutankhamun's treasures ever since. When the exhibition, The Treasures of Tutankhamun, traveled the world in the 1970s, millions came to see it, but behind the glass cases and velvet ropes, museum curators reported strange occurrences: lights flickering, alarms tripping, staff falling ill, a whisper, a chill, a presence, nothing provable, everything remembered. Perhaps the curse is not death, but obsession. Those who enter the king's realm cannot forget it. The dream follows them. The boy king, silent and golden, watches from behind his mask, and perhaps that is the curse: to be drawn ever deeper, to seek, to touch, to know, and never to escape the echo of that sacred stillness. Carter himself, years after the discovery, wrote, "The tomb has become my world. I wake with it. I sleep with it. There is no corner of my life untouched. A curse, or a calling." Now, dear dreamer, we step back from these trembling shadows and return to the artifacts themselves, for in one corner of the tomb, beside the throne and chariot, lay a group of items that pointed not to eternity, but to the world Tutankhamun left behind. Letters, rings, bracelets, lockets, memories. Beneath the grandeur of shrines and coffins, beyond the gaze of gilded gods and guardian statues, lay things far more delicate. Tucked into carved boxes, hidden among linens and oils, were the soft remnants of connection. Not symbols of kingship or divine authority, but of intimacy. Tutankhamun, for all his titles and regalia, was still a young man, and in his tomb, the echoes of his heart remain. Among the treasures discovered were bracelets and amulets, some inscribed not with official cartouches or political titles, but with quiet symbols: lotus flowers, ducks in flight, joined hands, personal tokens, not propaganda, perhaps not even meant to be seen by any eyes but his. There was a ring, carved from gold and black resin, bearing two names side by side: Tutankhamun and Ankhesenamun, his wife, his queen, his half-sister. Together, they were the last bloom of a royal line unraveling. Children of Akhenaten's revolution, survivors of religious and political upheaval, inheritors of a throne that had become a shadow. And yet, they may have loved. Their marriage, arranged by custom and blood, still bears the marks of gentleness. In surviving Stele from earlier in Tutankhamun's reign, he is shown sitting beside her, not towering over her as pharaohs often appear, but at eye level, equal, their hands entwined. Ankhesenamun pouring perfume into his palm, touching his shoulder, gazing toward him. These were not scenes of duty, they were scenes of companionship, and within the tomb, these echoes of affection remained. Among the linen wrappings, small bouquets of dried lotus petals were found, offered, perhaps by Ankhesenamun herself, their stems long decayed, but their shape still curled in gentle repose, tucked near the coffin's surface. The lotus, symbol of rebirth and the rising sun, was also a flower of courtship, of scent, of beauty, a gesture of farewell. One particularly poignant object was a painted box, its surface adorned with scenes of the royal couple. On one panel, the young king stands, bow in hand, while Ankhesenamun places a hand on his back, not pushing, not restraining, but steadying. A touch that says, "I am with you." Inside the box, fragments of linen undergarments were found, embroidered delicately with her name. Was it a gift? A remnant of their shared life? A ritual offering? And then, perhaps most tellingly, there is absence. After Tutankhamun's death, Ankhesenamun vanishes almost entirely from the record. No great tomb, no funeral texts, no monuments. She disappears into the sands of history, leaving behind only a single, desperate letter found in the Hittite royal archives. It tells the story of an Egyptian queen ever named but believed to be Ankhesenamun writing to the enemy king in the north. "My husband has died. I have no son. They say you have many sons. Send me one, and he shall be king of Egypt. I will never marry a servant." It is a message full of fear and autonomy. A woman trying to save a throne, and perhaps herself. But the Hittite prince she requested was murdered before he arrived, and Ankhesenamun disappears. She does not lie beside Tutankhamun. She has no known tomb. Only this love, wrapped in shadow. And so, in his chamber, surrounded by gods and guardians, Tutankhamun rests alone, yet not unloved. Her presence is still there. In the lotus petals, in the bracelets, in the names carved side by side on gold, in the silence that speaks of parting. The Egyptians believed that names carried essence, that to speak a name was to keep the soul alive. And though Ankhesenamun's name was lost for centuries, it rises again now, whispered on the lips of dreamers who sense the ache behind the crown. This is not the story of a pharaoh. It is the story of a boy and a girl, entangled in duty, surrounded by gods, and separated too soon. And perhaps that, too, is part of the tomb spell, that in gazing upon Tutankhamun's treasures, we are not merely witnessing the trappings of a king, but the residue of love. Now, dear dreamer, we prepare to close this chamber, but not yet, for one final mystery remains. How did all this survive? Who preserved it? Who forgot? And what does it mean that this tomb, of all tombs, was found intact? For 3,000 years, the tomb of Tutankhamun lay undisturbed beneath the shifting sands of the Valley of the Kings, while other tombs were broken into, looted, stripped bare by time and greed. His remained hidden, sealed, intact, a secret held not just by stone and earth, but by something more elusive, memory. Not memory in the human sense, not the kind etched in scrolls or chiseled into temples, but a deeper memory, one carried by the land itself, a silence that remembered. It is one of history's most beautiful paradoxes. Tutankhamun, a boy king of brief reign, nearly erased from records, buried in a tomb smaller than those of noblemen, became the most remembered pharaoh of them all. Why? To begin, we must recall the final pages of his mortal life. After his death, annexed, premature, perhaps mysterious, the court acted quickly. His tomb was likely not ready. A smaller tomb, possibly meant for a private noble, was adapted. His name was later struck from royal lists, his legacy forgotten by succeeding dynasties. Even the city built by his father, Akhenaten, was abandoned and buried in sand. The world moved on, but his tomb did not. For centuries, no one spoke his name, and yet, no one touched his resting place. There is evidence that 2 minor intrusions occurred shortly after his burial, perhaps thieves seeking quick riches, but the tomb was at its location, obscured by the rubble from other excavations. Over time, even its entrance was buried beneath the construction of Ramses VI's tomb, just above it. A coincidence? Or providence? It was as if the earth itself conspired to protect the boy. Centuries passed, the world changed, languages died, empires fell, and still he slept. Then came the 20th century. Howard Carter, driven by intuition, obsession, and a strange patience, dug for 6 seasons with little reward. Many gave up on him. Lord Carnarvon nearly withdrew his support, and then one final try, one final descent, and a stairway appeared. When the tomb was finally opened, it was not merely a discovery of treasure, it was a moment of resurrection, of memory stirring after a sleep too long. Tutankhamun, the forgotten king, returned, not in body, not even in name, but in presence. The discovery captured the world's imagination, not for politics, not for power, but for mystery. A sealed room, a golden mask, a boy buried with toys, weapons, and perfume. For the first time in modern history, we did not meet a king through his conquests or monuments. We met him in his dreams, and those dreams became ours. Museums were transformed by his treasures. Books were written, films made. Children around the world learned to spell his name. He became a symbol not of empire, but of eternity hidden in fragility. Even now, when his objects tour the world, people wait in silence to stand before them, not to be dazzled, but to feel something that cannot be named. A presence, a hum beneath time. Perhaps that is the memory we speak of, a memory not held in stone or text, but in the collective yearning of the human spirit, a longing to remember something ancient, something pure, a child who ruled, who died, who was loved, who was almost lost, and who was found. Today, the tomb still rests in the Valley of the Kings, its chambers reconstructed, its artifacts scattered across museums. His body lies in a climate-controlled glass case, his face visible beneath the mask, no longer. And yet his story is more alive than ever. Tutankhamun's memory refused to die, not because of gold, not because of grandeur, but because in the silence of that sealed room, the human soul still shimmered, and we, dreamers across time, still hear its echo. Now, as our journey comes to its close, let us step gently from the tomb. Let the sand fall once more into place. Let the torches dim. Let the boy king sleep. We carry him now not as myth, not as artifact but as remembrance, the echo of a whisper, the warmth of a name spoken once more. Tutankhamun. As our journey through the tomb of Tutankhamun draws to a close, let these ancient whispers settle softly into your consciousness like wind-blown petals gathering on a forgotten threshold. We have walked together through chambers of gold and silence, past statues that waited, linens that remembered, mirrors that reflected more than flesh. We have stepped gently between offerings of joy and guardians of sorrow. And in the hush beyond the final shrine, we have found not just a boy king but the quiet echo of every soul that ever longed to be remembered. The mysteries we have explored tonight are not puzzles to be solved, but meditations to be held. For Tutankhamun was not just a pharaoh, he was a name lost and found, a flame extinguished too soon, and yet never quite dark. He was a voice silenced by time, yet made immortal by curiosity, reverence, and the dreaming heart of humanity. If tonight's journey has brought you a measure of peace, if the shadows of these ancient walls have quieted the noise of modern thought, then consider becoming a traveler with us. Subscribe to The Dreaming Historian, and let each week carry you further into the soft corridors of time's forgotten breath. Let us know where in the world did you join us from. From what starlit city or quiet village do you drift into sleep tonight? Your presence, though silent, joins the circle of seekers, who listen not for answers, but for echoes. And as you rest, may your dreams be filled with golden masks and starlit mirrors, with lotus-scented winds and guardian statues who never close their eyes. Let the eternal Nile flow beside your sleep. Let the gods whisper only blessings, and let the name you carry be held, like his, in the memory that refuses to die. Sleep well, dear dreamer, and may the boy king guide you gently through the duet of dreams, toward a dawn that knows no end.